Sarah Martinez sat in the back row of the music room, trying to make herself invisible. She watched as her classmates played their instruments with ease. Their fingers moved quickly across the piano keys, making beautiful sounds that filled the room. Sarah's own fingers felt clumsy and slow when she tried to play. The 17-year-old girl had always been quiet. She spoke softly and kept to herself most of the time. While other students laughed and joked before class started, Sarah opened her music book and pretended to study the notes on the page. She knew the notes by heart, but looking at them gave her something to do with her eyes. Mrs. Chen, the music teacher, walked around the room, listening to each student practice. She was a kind woman with gray hair and gentle eyes. She always wore bright scarves that matched her colorful personality. Mrs. Chen believed every student had music inside them. She just needed to help them find it. "Sarah, your turn," Mrs. Chen said with a warm smile. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She walked slowly to the old piano at the front of the room. 20 pairs of eyes watched her every move. Her hands shook slightly as she placed them on the keys. She began to play a simple song they had been learning for weeks. The notes came out wrong. Her left hand played too fast, while her right hand played too slow. The melody sounded broken and sad. Sarah's face turned red with embarrassment. She heard someone whisper behind her, but she could not make out the words. "That's okay, Sarah," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Music takes time to learn. Keep practicing." Sarah nodded and walked back to her seat. She felt like everyone was still looking at her, even though most students had already moved on to other things. She wished she could disappear into the floor. After school, Sarah walked to her family's small restaurant. The sign outside said, "Martinez Family Kitchen," in faded letters. The paint was peeling and one of the lights was broken. Inside, the restaurant was warm and smelled like her mother's cooking. Red checkered tablecloths covered small wooden tables. Pictures of her family hung on the walls. "How was school, mija?" her mother asked in Spanish, then switched to English. "Did you have music class today?" "Yes, Mama," Sarah replied, tying an apron around her waist. "It was fine." Her mother, Rosa Martinez, looked at her daughter with knowing eyes. Rosa had worked in the restaurant kitchen for 15 years. Her hands were rough from washing dishes and chopping vegetables, but her heart was soft. She could always tell when Sarah was upset about something. "You know, your great-aunt Elena used to play piano," Rosa said while stirring a pot of beans. "She was very good. People came from all over town to hear her play." Sarah had heard this story before, but she never got tired of it. Great-aunt Elena had lived in Cuba many years ago. She played piano in fancy hotels and restaurants. People said she could make the piano sing like a bird or cry like rain. "I wish I could play like her," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe you can." Her mother said, "Music runs in our family, it just takes time to come out." Sarah wanted to believe her mother, but she felt so different from the other students in her music class. They made playing look easy. Their parents probably paid for expensive lessons. They had nice instruments at home. Sarah only had an old keyboard she bought at a yard sale for $20. The restaurant got busy during the dinner hours. Sarah served tables and took orders. She smiled at customers and brought them plates of her mother's delicious food. But inside her mind, she was thinking about music. She wondered what it would feel like to play a song perfectly. She wondered what it would be like to have people listen and enjoy her music instead of feeling sorry for her. Late that evening, after the last customer left, Sarah helped her parents clean the restaurant. They wiped tables, swept floors, and washed dishes. It was hard work, but they did it together as a family. Her father, Miguel, counted the money from the cash register. There was never very much, but it was enough to pay the bills and buy groceries. "Sarah, Mrs. Chen called today," her father said, not looking up from the money. "She wants to talk about the school talent show." Sarah's stomach dropped. Every year the school had a big talent show where students performed for their families and friends. It was supposed to be fun, but for Sarah it sounded terrifying. "What did she say?" Sarah asked, although she was not sure she wanted to know. "She thinks you should be in it. She says all the music students need to participate," Miguel said. "It's part of your grade." Sarah felt like crying. She imagined herself on the big stage in the school auditorium. Hundreds of people would be watching. Her classmates would play beautiful songs, and then it would be her turn. She would mess up in front of everyone. People would feel embarrassed for her. "I don't think I'm ready, Papa," Sarah said softly. Her father put down the money and looked at his daughter. Miguel Martinez was a practical man who worked hard every day. He did not understand music, but he understood his daughter's fears. "Sometimes we have to do things even when we're scared," he said. "That's how we grow stronger." That night, Sarah lay in her small bedroom thinking about the talent show. Her room was simple but comfortable. She had a twin bed with a colorful blanket her grandmother made. On her desk sat the old keyboard she had bought with money from working at the restaurant. She got up quietly and turned on the keyboard. The volume was set very low so she would not wake her parents. She put on headphones and began to play. In the darkness of her room, with no one watching, Sarah's fingers moved differently across the keys. They felt more confident, more sure. She had been teaching herself songs from the internet for 2 years. Late at night, when the restaurant was closed and her parents were sleeping, Sarah would practice. She learned songs by listening to them over and over. She watched videos that showed her where to put her fingers. Nobody knew about her secret practice sessions. Sarah was afraid to tell anyone because she thought they might laugh at her for trying to learn on her own. She worried that real music. Teachers would say she was doing everything wrong. But alone in her room, Sarah felt different. The music that came from her keyboard sounded beautiful to her. It made her feel happy and sad at the same time. It made her feel like she was flying. As she played a song she had learned from a video, Sarah wondered if maybe her mother was right. Maybe music really did run in their family. Maybe Great Aunt Elena's gift was sleeping somewhere inside her, waiting for the right moment to wake up. The talent show was still weeks away. Sarah had time to practice, time to prepare. But as she turned off the keyboard and went to bed, she still felt nervous about performing in front of people. She had no idea that her secret musical world was about to collide with her public life in ways she could never imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Mrs. Chen mentioned the talent show. Sarah tried not to think about it, but the worry followed her everywhere she went. At school, she watched her classmates practice their performances during lunch break. Some played guitar, others sang popular songs. They all looked so confident and happy. Sarah spent her lunch breaks in the library instead. She liked the quiet there. Books did not judge her or make her feel nervous. She could hide behind the tall shelves and eat her sandwich in peace. Sometimes she looked at books about famous musicians, wondering what made them special. On Wednesday afternoon, Sarah was walking home from school when she saw a small crowd gathered outside the community center. The building was old but well kept, with large windows and a red door. A sign in the window said, "Senior activities today, all welcome." Sarah had passed this building hundreds of times but never went inside. Today, curiosity made her stop and look through the window. She could see elderly people sitting in chairs arranged in a circle. They were talking and laughing together. It looked warm and friendly inside. "Excuse me, dear," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned around to see a woman in her 50s with kind brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a name tag that said, "Mrs. Rodriguez, Activities Director." "Are you interested in visiting with our seniors?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked with a bright smile. "We always need young volunteers. The elderly people here love talking to teenagers." "Oh, I was just looking," Sarah said quickly. "I need to get home to work." "Where do you work?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, walking alongside Sarah. "My family has a restaurant, Martinez Family Kitchen, about 6 blocks from here." "I know that place. I eat there sometimes. Your mother makes the best rice and beans in town," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "What's your name?" "Sarah Martinez." "Well, Sarah, if you ever want to volunteer, we would love to have you. We meet every Wednesday and Friday afternoon. The seniors get lonely sometimes, and young people bring them so much joy." Sarah nodded politely and continued walking home. But Mrs. Rodriguez's words stayed with her. She thought about her own grandmother who had died 2 years ago. Grandma Elena had been full of stories about the old country and family members Sarah had never met. She missed having an older person to talk to. The next Friday, Sarah found herself standing outside the community center again. She had finished her homework early and had some time before she needed to help at the restaurant. She took a deep breath and pushed open the red door. Inside, the main room was bright and cheerful. Sunlight streamed through the large windows. About 20 elderly people sat in comfortable chairs arranged in a loose circle. Some were knitting, others were playing cards. A few were just talking quietly together. "Sarah," Mrs. Rodriguez called out when she saw her. "I'm so glad you came. Everyone, this is Sarah Martinez. Her family owns the wonderful restaurant on Maple Street." Several heads turned toward Sarah and she felt her face grow warm, but instead of judging looks, she saw friendly, welcoming faces. An elderly man with a white beard waved at her. A woman with silver hair patted the empty chair next to her. "Come sit by me, dear," the woman said. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. I've been wanting to meet someone from your family's restaurant. I drive by it every day." Sarah sat down carefully. Mrs. Patterson was small and thin, but her eyes were bright and alert. She wore a purple sweater and had painted her nails a cheerful pink color. "Do you go to school around here?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Yes, I go to Lincoln High School. I'm a junior." "Oh, wonderful. What subjects do you like?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I like English class, and, well, I'm taking music class, but I'm not very good at it." "Music," said a man sitting across from them. "I used to teach music at the elementary school. My name is Mr. Kim. What instrument do you play?" Sarah felt nervous again. "Piano, but not very well. I make a lot of mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes. When they're learning," Mr. Kim said gently. "I taught piano for 35 years. The best students were not the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who kept trying even after they made mistakes." Mrs. Rodriguez clapped her hands together to get everyone's attention. "I have an idea," she said. "Next week we should have some entertainment. Would anyone like to perform something for the group?" Several people raised their hands. Mrs. Patterson said she could recite a poem she had memorized in school 70 years ago. Mr. Kim offered to tell jokes. Another woman said she could show everyone how to fold paper into animal shapes. "What about music?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, looking directly at Sarah. "Do we have any musicians here?" Sarah's heart started beating faster. She shook her head quickly. "I'm not good enough to perform for people." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Patterson. "We're not music critics. We just like to hear young people play. It, reminds us of our own children and grandchildren." "I could just play something very simple," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe a children's song, nothing fancy." "That sounds perfect," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "We have an old piano in the corner. It's not the best instrument in the world, but it still makes music." Sarah looked over at the piano. It was an upright piano, with a wooden case that had been polished but showed its age. Some of the white keys were slightly yellow and she could see scratches on the surface, but it looked like it had been loved and used for many years. "I don't know," Sarah said. "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up," said Mr. Kim with a laugh. "We'll still clap for you. Most of us can't hear very well anyway." The other seniors laughed at his joke. Sarah realized they were not laughing at her, but with her. These people had lived long lives. They had made their own mistakes and survived them. They were not going to judge a 17-year-old girl for playing wrong notes on an old piano. "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "I'll try to play something simple. Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or something like that." "Wonderful," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Next Friday we'll have our little concert. Sarah will play piano for us." As Sarah walked home that afternoon, she felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had committed to playing piano for a group of people. It was not the school talent show with hundreds of students and parents watching, but it still felt scary. That evening at the restaurant, Sarah told her parents about volunteering at the community center. Her mother smiled while she cooked dinner. "That's wonderful, Misha. It's good to help other people. And playing piano for them will be good practice for you. I'm only going to play something very simple. Sarah said quickly. "They don't expect anything fancy." Her father looked up from the cash register. "Sometimes simple is better than fancy. Your great-aunt Elena always said the most beautiful music comes from the heart, not from showing off." That night, Sarah sat at her keyboard with her headphones on. She played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star over and over again. It was such an easy song that she could play it without thinking, but she wanted to make sure she would not make any mistakes in front of the seniors. After playing the simple song 20 times, Sarah felt restless. Her fingers wanted to play something more interesting. Almost without thinking, she began to play a song she had learned from watching videos online. It was a beautiful, sad melody that made her think of her grandmother. As she played, Sarah imagined the elderly people at the community center. She thought about Mrs. Patterson with her bright pink nails and purple sweater. She thought about Mr. Kim, who had taught piano for 35 years. She thought about how they had welcomed her with such kindness. Maybe, Sarah thought, she could play something a little more interesting than Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. These people had lived long lives full of joy and sadness, love and loss. Maybe they would appreciate music that reflected real feelings, not just children's songs. But then Sarah shook her head. She was getting ahead of herself. She had promised to play something simple, and that was what she would do. She did not want to risk embarrassing herself or disappointing the seniors who were expecting a basic tune. Still, as she turned off the keyboard and got ready for bed, Sarah could not stop thinking about the more complex music that lived inside her fingers. She wondered what would happen if she ever found the courage to let that music out in front of other people. The week passed slowly. Every day Sarah thought about the upcoming performance at the community center. She practiced Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star until she could play it perfectly with her eyes closed. She was ready to give the seniors exactly what they expected. Nothing more, nothing less. But deep inside, a part of Sarah hoped that someday she would be brave enough to share the real music that lived in her heart. Friday afternoon came faster than Sarah expected. She had spent the whole week practicing simple songs on her keyboard at home. Her fingers knew Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star so well that she could play it without thinking. She had also practiced Mary Had a Little Lamb, just in case the seniors wanted to hear something different. At school that day, Sarah could barely pay attention to her classes. Her mind kept wandering to the community center and the old piano waiting for her. During lunch, she sat in the library as usual, but instead of reading, she kept looking at the clock on the wall. "You seem nervous about something," said Jenny, a girl from her English class who was sitting at the next table. Sarah looked up, surprised. Jenny was popular and confident, the kind of person who always seemed to know what to say. Sarah had never talked to her much before. "I have to play piano for some people today," Sarah said quietly. "That's cool. Are you in a band or something?" Jenny asked. "No, nothing like that. Just playing for seniors at the community center. Something very simple." "Still sounds scary to me," Jenny said with a smile. "I could never play music in front of people, even if it was just one person." "You're braver than you think." After Jenny walked away, Sarah thought about what she had said. Brave? Sarah did not feel brave at all. She felt nervous and worried about making mistakes. But maybe doing something even when you felt scared was what being brave meant. The final bell rang, and Sarah gathered her books. Instead of going straight to the community center, she decided to stop at home first. She wanted to practice one more time on her keyboard to make sure she was ready. At home, the house was quiet. Her parents were at the restaurant preparing for the dinner crowd. Sarah sat down at her keyboard and put on her headphones. She played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star 3 times perfectly. Then, almost without thinking, her fingers began to play something else. It was a melody she had learned months ago from watching a video online. The song was called Clair de Lune by a French composer named Debussy. It was much more difficult than children's songs, but Sarah had practiced it so many times in secret that her fingers knew every note. The music was soft and dreamy, like moonlight dancing on water. When Sarah played it, she felt like she was floating. The melody was sad but beautiful, gentle but powerful. It was nothing like the simple songs she planned to play for the seniors. Sarah stopped playing and looked at her hands. Where had that music come from? She had been so focused on preparing simple songs that she had almost forgotten about all the other music she had taught herself. For 2 years, she had been learning songs from videos, practicing late at night when no one could hear her. She thought about her great-aunt Elena, the piano player from Cuba that her mother always talked about. Elena had played in fancy hotels and restaurants. People came from far away to hear her music. What kind of music had Elena played? Probably not children's songs. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "Good luck today, mija. Remember, music comes from the heart. Music comes from the heart." Sarah had heard her mother say that before, but today the words felt different. What was in Sarah's heart? Simple children's songs or something deeper and more beautiful? She looked at the clock. It was almost time to go to the community center. Sarah stood up from her keyboard, then sat back down. Her fingers found the keys again, and she began to play Clair de Lune one more time. The music filled her headphones and her heart. What if, Sarah thought, she played something like this for the seniors? What if she shared the real music that lived inside her instead of just the safe, simple songs everyone expected? But then fear crept back in. What if she made mistakes? What if the seniors thought she was showing off? What if she forgot the notes in the middle of the song? It would be so embarrassing. Sarah shook her head and turned off the keyboard. She had promised to play simple songs, and that was what she would do. She grabbed her backpack and headed for the door. The walk to the community center felt longer than usual. Sarah's stomach was full of butterflies. She kept thinking about the old piano and all the people who would be listening to her. When she reached the red door, she stopped and took 3 deep breaths before going inside. The main room was full of seniors sitting in their usual circle of chairs. Mrs. Rodriguez was setting up a small table with cookies and coffee. When she saw Sarah, she smiled and waved. "There's our musician," Mrs. Rodriguez announced. "Everyone, Sarah is here to play piano for us today." About 20 faces turned toward Sarah. She recognized Mrs. Patterson in her bright yellow sweater today. Mr. Kim was there too, sitting in the front row with an encouraging smile. There were other faces she had seen before and a few new ones. "Hello, dear," Mrs. Patterson called out. "We've been looking forward to your music all week." "I hope you don't expect too much," Sarah said nervously. "I'm just going to play some simple songs." "Any music is good music," said Mr. Kim. "When I was teaching, I always told my students that the most important thing was to play with feeling, not perfection." Sarah walked over to the old piano in the corner. Up close, she could see that it was older than she had thought. The wood was scratched and one of the pedals was slightly bent. But when she pressed middle C, the note rang out clear and true. The piano had been tuned recently. "This piano has been here for 40 years, Mrs. Rodriguez said, coming over to stand beside Sarah. "My predecessor told me that it used to belong to a music teacher who donated it when she retired. It's seen a lot of music over the years." Sarah sat down on the piano bench and adjusted its height. The keys felt smooth under her fingers. She could sense all the seniors watching her, but their faces looked kind and patient. These were not people who would judge her harshly if she made mistakes. "What would you like to hear?" Sarah asked, her voice a little shaky. "Whatever you'd like to play, dear," Mrs. Patterson said. "We're just happy to have live music." Sarah placed her hands on the keys in position to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This was the plan. Play the simple song, maybe play Mary Had a Little Lamb afterward, and then sit down, safe and easy. But as her fingers hovered over the keys, Sarah heard her mother's voice in her head. Music comes from the heart. She thought about her great-aunt Elena playing piano in Cuban hotels. She thought about Mr. Kim saying that feeling was more important than perfection. Most of all, Sarah thought about the beautiful music that lived inside her fingers. The music she played alone in her room at night. The music that made her feel like she was flying. The music that came from her heart, not from fear. Sarah's hands remained still above the keys. The room was completely quiet, waiting for her to begin. This was the moment when everything would change, although Sarah did not know it yet. This was the moment when she had to decide. Would she play it safe or would she let her heart make music? The old piano waited patiently, ready to sing whatever song Sarah chose to play. The seniors waited too, their faces full of kindness and anticipation. And somewhere deep inside Sarah's chest, her heart waited to see if she would be brave enough to let the real music out. Time seemed to stop as Sarah sat at the piano bench, her whole future balanced on the edge of this single moment. Would she play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star like she had planned? Or would she find the courage to play something that truly came from her heart? In the quiet room full of patient, loving faces, Sarah Martinez was about to make the most important musical decision of her life. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as they hovered above the piano keys. The room was so quiet she could hear the old clock ticking on the wall. 20 pairs of eyes watched her with kind patience. These elderly people had all the time in the world. They would not rush her or make her feel bad if she took a moment to get ready. Mrs. Patterson adjusted her yellow sweater and smiled encouragingly. Mr. Kim leaned forward slightly in his chair, his hands folded in his lap. Mrs. Rodriguez stood, near the refreshment table, holding a plate of cookies but not moving. Sarah's mind raced with thoughts. She could see her fingers playing the opening notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It would be so easy, so safe. The seniors would clap politely, maybe ask for another simple song, and then she could sit down with a feeling of accomplishment. But something else was happening inside her chest. Her heart was beating fast, but not just from nervousness. There was something else there too, a feeling she could not quite name. It felt like excitement mixed with longing. It felt like a bird that had been caged for too long and suddenly saw an open door. "Take your time, dear," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "There's no hurry." Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could see her bedroom late at night. She could feel her keyboard under her fingers as she played the songs that made her heart soar. She could remember the feeling of discovering a new piece of music online and practicing it over and over until it became part of her. She thought about her great-aunt Elena. What had Elena felt like when she sat down at a piano in a Cuban hotel? Had she been nervous? Had she ever played simple children's songs for audiences who expected greatness? Sarah's mother always said that Elena had magic in her fingers, that music ran in their family blood. But Sarah had never felt magical. She had always felt ordinary, clumsy, not good enough, except late at night in her room. There, with her headphones on and the world shut out, Sarah had sometimes felt something that might have been magic. Her hands were still positioned above the keys. The opening chord of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was just one small movement away. All she had to do was press down and begin the simple melody everyone expected. Instead, Sarah's mind drifted to a memory from 6 months ago. She had been practicing late at night when she discovered a video of a famous pianist playing something called Nocturne in E-flat major by Chopin. The music had been so beautiful that Sarah had started crying without knowing why. She had spent weeks learning that piece, note by note, phrase by phrase. It was much harder than anything she had ever attempted, but something about the melody had called to her heart. When she finally played it all the way through without mistakes, Sarah had felt like she was flying. "I'm ready," Sarah said quietly, opening her eyes. The seniors settled back in their chairs, smiling expectantly. Mrs. Rodriguez set down her plate of cookies and gave Sarah a thumbs-up sign. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were no longer shaking. Something had changed in the last few moments. A door had opened somewhere inside her, and she could feel music pouring through it like sunlight through a window. Her fingers found their position on the keys. But instead of the simple chord that would begin, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, they moved to a different position entirely. Her left hand settled into the bass notes while her right hand prepared to play a melody that was infinitely more complex and beautiful. Sarah took one last deep breath. This was it. The moment when everything would change. She was about to share the real music that lived in her heart. She was about to trust these kind strangers with the most precious thing she owned. the secret songs that had kept her company on so many lonely nights. What if they did not understand? What if they thought she was showing off? What if she made mistakes and embarrassed herself in front of people who had been nothing but kind to her? But then Sarah remembered Mr. Kim's words. The most important thing is to play with feeling, not perfection, and her mother's voice. Music comes from the heart. And something her great-aunt Elena had supposedly said. The most beautiful music comes from the heart, not from showing off. Sarah's hands settled onto the keys with new confidence. She was not showing off. She was sharing a gift. She was letting these lovely people hear the music that had been growing inside her for 2 years of secret practice sessions. The first note of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major rang out into the quiet room. It was nothing like "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." This note was rich and deep and full of emotion. It seemed to hang in the air for a moment before the second note joined it, and then the third. Sarah felt the melody flow out of her fingers like water. Each note was exactly where it needed to be. The music was sad and beautiful and hopeful, all at the same time. It told a story without words, painted pictures without colors. She could feel something changing in the room around her, but she did not look up to see the faces of her audience. She was lost in the music now, completely focused on the conversation between her heart and her fingers and the old piano that had been waiting 40 years to sing like this again. The melody danced and swirled, sometimes soft as a whisper, sometimes strong as ocean waves. Sarah's left hand played bass notes that provided a foundation, while her right hand wove the main melody like golden thread through silk. This was not the shaky, uncertain girl who had sat down at the piano bench 5 minutes ago. This was someone else entirely, someone who had found her voice and was no longer afraid to use it. Sarah had made her choice. Instead of hiding behind simple songs and safe expectations, she had opened the door to her real musical self. And there was no going back now. The nocturne continued to pour from her fingers, filling the community center with beauty that none of the seniors had expected when they had asked for a simple tune. Sarah Martinez was no longer playing it safe. She was playing from her heart, and her heart was full of music that demanded to be heard. The old piano had not sounded like this in decades. Sarah's touch brought out warmth and richness in its voice that had been sleeping, waiting for the right musician to wake it up. Together, the girl and the instrument were creating something magical in a room full of people who had almost forgotten that magic was possible, and this was only the beginning. As the beautiful notes of Chopin's Nocturne flowed from the old piano, something extraordinary began to happen in the community center. The change was not just in the music, it was in Sarah herself. Her shoulders, which had been hunched with nervousness just moments before, relaxed and straightened. Her back became tall and graceful. Her hands, which had shaken with fear, now moved across the keys with confidence and elegance. It was as if the music had transformed her from the inside out. Sarah's eyes were closed now, but not from fear. She had closed them to better feel the music flowing through her. Each note seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest, traveling down her arms and out through her fingertips. She was no longer playing the piano. She was having a conversation with it. The old instrument responded to her touch like it had been waiting years for this moment. Notes that might have sounded thin or weak from other players rang out rich and full under Sarah's hands. The piano seemed to understand that this was special, that this young woman had music in her soul that needed to be shared. Sarah's breathing became deeper and more relaxed. Her whole body swayed slightly with the rhythm of the music, and she looked like a completely different person than the shy, nervous girl who had walked into the community center an hour ago. As the nocturne continued, Sarah's confidence grew with each measure. Her left hand played the bass notes with strength and certainty. Her right hand shaped the melody with delicate expression, making some notes sing softly and others ring out like bells. She had practiced this piece hundreds of times alone in her bedroom, but it had never sounded like this before. Playing for an audience, even the small and kind audience, had awakened something in her music. It had more life, more feeling, more power. Sarah began to remember things her mother had told her about great-aunt Elena. How Elena would close her eyes when she played, just like Sarah was doing now. How Elena's whole body would move with the music. How people said Elena did not just play the piano, she became one with it. For the first time in her life, Sarah understood what those stories meant. She was not just pressing keys to make sounds. She was pouring her heart out through her fingers. Every emotion she had ever felt was flowing into the music. Her loneliness, her dreams, her fears, her hopes. The shy, uncertain part of Sarah's personality seemed to melt away as she played. In its place was someone confident and expressive and powerful. This was who she really was underneath all the fear and self-doubt. This was the real Sarah Martinez. Her posture became even more elegant as the music continued. Her wrists were relaxed and graceful. Her fingers curved perfectly over the keys. Without any formal lessons, Sarah had developed proper technique simply by watching videos and practicing with love and dedication. The transformation was so complete that if someone had walked into the room at that moment, they might not have recognized the nervous teenager who had sat down at the piano bench just minutes before. This person playing Chopin with such beauty and skill seemed like a trained musician, someone who belonged on concert stages. But Sarah was not thinking about concert stages or formal training. She was lost in the pure joy of making music. Every cell in her body felt alive and vibrant. Her heart was beating in rhythm with the music. Her breathing matched the phrases of the melody. As she moved into the most emotional section of the nocturne, Sarah's playing became even more expressive. She made the piano whisper secrets in the soft passages and cry out with longing in the louder ones. Her touch on the keys was sometimes gentle as butterfly wings, sometimes firm as ocean waves. The music seemed to lift Sarah up, making her feel like she was floating above the piano bench. All the weight of her daily worries, school stress, family financial struggles, fear about the future, disappeared. There was only the music and the feeling of complete freedom. Sarah's transformation was not just physical or emotional, it was spiritual. She felt connected to something larger than herself, to her great-aunt Elena, who had played piano decades ago in Cuba, to all the musicians who had ever sat at a piano and poured their hearts out through their fingers, to the mystery and beauty of music itself. Her face, which had been tense with worry when she sat down, now glowed with inner light. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she played the most beautiful passages. She looked peaceful and joyful and completely in her element. The old piano seemed to respond to Sarah's transformation by sounding richer and more beautiful with each note. Its voice became warmer, more resonant. The instrument and the girl had found each other, and together they were creating something magical. Sarah's body continued to move naturally with the music. Her shoulders rose and fell with the melodic lines. Her head tilted slightly as she listened to the harmony she was creating. She looked like a flower turning toward the sun. As the nocturne approached its most technically challenging section, Sarah's playing became even more confident. Her fingers flew across the keys with grace and precision. The difficult passages that had taken her months to learn now flowed out effortlessly, as if she had been born knowing how to play them. The girl who had been afraid to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in front of people, was now performing one of the most beautiful pieces in all of classical music, with the skill of a professional pianist. The transformation was so complete, so remarkable, that it seemed almost impossible. But Sarah was no longer thinking about impossibility or possibility. She was thinking only about beauty and music and the incredible feeling of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The community center had become a concert hall. The old piano had become a magnificent instrument, and shy, nervous Sarah Martinez had become the musician she was always meant to be. The most amazing part was that this was only the beginning. Sarah had no idea what was about to happen next, how her beautiful playing was affecting the people listening to her, or how this single moment of courage was about to change her entire life. While Sarah played, lost in her own musical world, something amazing was happening in the room around her. The 20 elderly people who had expected to hear a simple children's song were experiencing something they had not felt in years. The Pure magic of live music played with heart and soul. Mrs. Patterson, sitting in the front row in her bright yellow sweater, felt tears running down her cheeks. She did not try to wipe them away. The music Sarah was playing reminded her of her late husband Robert, who had loved classical piano music. Before he died 5 years ago, Robert would put on records of famous pianists and they would dance slowly in their living room. Mrs. Patterson had not cried for Robert in over a year. She thought she was done grieving. But Sarah's beautiful playing brought back memories of dancing with the love of her life, and the tears came naturally, mixed with both sadness and joy. The music was helping her remember not just the loss, but all the beautiful moments they had shared together. She leaned forward in her chair, not wanting to miss a single note. This was not the kind of music she had expected from a shy 17-year-old girl. This was the kind of music that professional pianists played in fancy concert halls. How was it possible that this young woman had been hiding such incredible talent? Mr. Kim, the retired music teacher, was having his own powerful reaction to Sarah's playing. In his 35 years of teaching piano to children, he had heard thousands of students play. Most of them were adequate, some were quite good, a few were talented, but Sarah Martinez was something else entirely. Mr. Kim could tell that she had no formal training. There were small things about her technique that would have been different if she had studied with a teacher. But her musical instincts were absolutely perfect. She understood the emotion of the music in a way that could not be taught. Mr. Kim found himself thinking about the most gifted students he had taught over the years. There was Jennifer, who had gone on to study at a music conservatory. There was Michael, who now played piano in a professional jazz band. But even his most talented students had not possessed the natural musical feeling that Sarah was displaying right now. He watched her hands as they moved across the keys with such grace and confidence. He watched her face peaceful and glowing with inner light. Mr. Kim had spent his whole career trying to help young people find their musical voices. Here was a young person who had found her voice completely on her own, and it was magnificent. Across the room, Mrs. Henderson was remembering her own grandmother, who had played piano for the church choir 60 years ago. Mrs. Henderson's grandmother had never played music as complex as what Sarah was playing now, but she had played with the same kind of feeling, the same kind of love. Mrs. Henderson had not thought about her grandmother's piano playing in decades, but Sarah's music brought it all back. Sitting next to Grandma on the piano bench as a little girl, watching those old hands create such beautiful sounds. The memory was so vivid that Mrs. Henderson could almost smell her grandmother's perfume and feel the warmth of her presence. Mr. Garcia, sitting near the window, was transported back to his youth in Mexico. His mother had saved money for years to buy an old piano for their house. It was not a good instrument. Several keys stuck and it was never quite in tune. But when his sister Maria played it, somehow it sounded beautiful anyway. Maria had died in a car accident when she was only 25. Mr. Garcia had not been able to listen to piano music for years afterward because it made him too sad. But Sarah's playing was healing something inside him. The music was helping him remember Maria with joy instead of only pain. All around the room, similar transformations were taking place. Mrs. Thompson was thinking about her daughter, who lived across the country and rarely called. Mr. Jackson was remembering the music he had danced to with his wife at their wedding 53 years ago. Mrs. Lee was thinking about the lullabies she had sung to her children when they were babies. Sarah's music was opening doors in their hearts that had been closed for years. It was bringing back memories they thought they had forgotten. It was helping them feel connected to people they had loved and times in their lives when they had been truly happy. But the seniors were not just remembering the past. They were also fully present in this magical moment. Many of them had attended concerts by famous musicians over the years. They had heard professional orchestras and renowned soloists, but there was something special about this intimate performance in their community center. Maybe it was because Sarah was so young and had so much of her life ahead of her. Maybe it was because her talent was such a wonderful surprise. Maybe it was because the old piano in the corner had never sounded so beautiful before. Or maybe it was because they could feel how much courage it had taken for this shy girl to play her heart out for them. They understood that they were witnessing something rare and precious, a young artist discovering her own power and sharing it with the world for the first time. Mrs. Rodriguez, the activities director, stood frozen by the refreshment table. She had organized hundreds of activities for the seniors over the years. They had enjoyed many singers, storytellers, and musicians, but nothing had ever created an atmosphere like this. The room felt charged with electricity. Everyone was completely focused on Sarah and her music. There was no whispering, no coughing, no shuffling of feet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to be ticking more quietly, as if it did not want to disturb the magic that was happening. Mrs. Rodriguez found herself thinking about her budget for activities. She had been trying to find ways to bring more professional entertainment to the seniors, but the costs were always too high. And here was this incredible musician living right in their neighborhood, playing for free because she had a kind heart and wanted to volunteer. But Mrs. Rodriguez also understood that what was happening was about much more than free entertainment. Sarah Martinez was not just playing music for these elderly people. She was sharing something precious with them. She was treating them like they mattered, like they deserved to hear beautiful music played with love and skill. As the nocturne continued to flow from Sarah's fingers, every person in the room was being changed by the experience. They were remembering what it felt like to be moved by art. They were connecting with their own emotions and memories in ways they had almost forgotten were possible. And they were witnessing the birth of a true musician. They could sense that this moment was as important for Sarah as it was for them. This was the moment when a shy, uncertain girl was discovering that she had something valuable to offer the world. The transformation was happening on both sides of the piano. Sarah was becoming who she was meant to be, and her audience was remembering what it meant to be fully alive and present for beauty. None of them knew it yet, but this afternoon in the community center would be remembered by everyone in the room for the rest of their lives. As Sarah continued to play the beautiful nocturne, her confidence grew even stronger. When the piece came to its gentle ending, she did not stop. Her fingers seemed to move by themselves to begin another song. This time, something completely different. She started playing Autumn Leaves, a jazz standard she had learned from watching online videos. But Sarah did not play it exactly like the original. She added her own touches, her own feeling. The melody was familiar, but her interpretation was unique and personal. The seniors in the room looked at each other with amazement. First, this young woman had played classical music like a professional pianist. Now she was playing jazz with the same skill and feeling. How many more surprises did she have? Mr. Kim leaned over to Mrs. Patterson and whispered, "In 35 years of teaching, I have never heard anything like this." Mrs. Patterson nodded, wiping away fresh tears. "She's not just playing music," she whispered back. "She's telling us stories." And that was exactly what Sarah was doing. As she played Autumn Leaves, she was thinking about changes and seasons and the way life moved in cycles. She was thinking about the seniors in the room and all the autumns they had seen in their long lives. She was thinking about her own life and the changes that might be coming. Her version of the song was sometimes sad, sometimes hopeful. It reminded the listeners of both endings and new beginnings. Sarah made the old piano sound like it was singing about the beauty of growing older, the wisdom that came with experience, the value of every season of life. As she played, something else began to happen in the community center. People who worked in other parts of the building started to notice the music. Mrs. Davis, who ran the exercise classes, paused in cleaning up her equipment to listen. The maintenance man, fixing a light in the hallway, stopped working and moved closer to the main room. Two women who had been walking past the building on the sidewalk outside stopped when they heard the piano music floating through the open windows. They looked at each other with surprise and curiosity. This did not sound like the usual community center activities. "Is that live music?" one of them asked. "It sounds like it," the other replied. "Should we go see?" They pushed through the red door and quietly found seats at the back of the room. Sarah was so lost in her music that she did not notice the newcomers. She was now playing an original melody that seemed to come directly from her heart. Sarah had never composed her own music before, but somehow her fingers were creating a song. that had never existed until this moment. It was a melody about dreams and hopes and the courage to be yourself. It was about the journey from fear to confidence, from hiding to sharing your gifts with the world. The seniors listened with wonder as Sarah created this new music in real time. They were witnessing something that would never happen again exactly the same way, a young artist discovering her creative power and using it to speak directly to their hearts. Mrs. Rodriguez quietly took out her phone and began recording. She knew this was a moment that needed to be preserved. But she was careful to stay far enough away that Sarah would not notice and become self-conscious. As Sarah played her original composition, more people began to appear in the doorway. Word was spreading through the building that something extraordinary was happening in the main activity room. Staff members, visitors, and people from other programs found reasons to walk by and listen, but they all stayed quiet and respectful. They could sense that this was a sacred moment, something precious that should not be disturbed. They watched this young woman at the old piano and marveled at the beauty she was creating. Sarah's playing had now attracted an audience of about 30 people, but she remained completely focused on her music. She had moved into a state where nothing existed except the piano and the melodies flowing through her. Time seemed to have stopped. She played for another 10 minutes, moving seamlessly from one piece to another. Classical music flowed into jazz. Jazz flowed into original compositions. Original compositions flowed into beautiful arrangements of songs everyone knew but had never heard played with such feeling. The old piano had never sounded so magnificent. Under Sarah's touch, it seemed to have found its true voice. Every note rang out clear and true, filled with emotion and meaning. The instrument and the musician had become perfect partners, creating music that was greater than either could produce alone. Mr. Kim found himself thinking about the young music students he had taught who were now studying at conservatories and music schools. He wondered if any of them had ever played with the natural musicality that Sarah was displaying. He doubted it. This girl had somehow taught herself not just to play the piano, but to truly understand music. She had developed her own style, her own voice. She played with the confidence of someone who had been performing for years, but with the freshness and originality of someone discovering music for the first time. As Sarah's impromptu concert continued, people began to pull out their phones. Mrs. Rodriguez was not the only one who understood that this was something special that needed to be shared. Videos were being taken, though everyone was careful to be quiet and unobtrusive. Some of the staff members started texting their friends and family members. "You have to see this," one message read. "There's a teenage girl playing piano at the community center and she's incredible." Within minutes, more people were arriving. Sarah's music was drawing an audience that kept growing, but she remained completely unaware of the attention she was attracting. She was in her own world, a world where music was the only language that mattered. The transformation that had begun when Sarah sat down at the piano was now complete. The shy, nervous girl who had worried about playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star had become a confident, expressive musician who was creating beauty that touched everyone who heard it. But Sarah had no idea that her moment of courage was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. She had no idea that the videos being recorded would soon be shared far beyond the community center. She had no idea that her musical gifts were about to be recognized by people who could help her develop them even further. All Sarah knew was that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. For the first time in her life, she felt completely and perfectly herself, and the music continued to pour from her heart through her fingers, filling the room with magic that would be remembered long after the last note faded away. When Sarah finally played her last note, the silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in the room had ever experienced. It was not an empty silence. It was full of emotion and wonder. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. They were still absorbing the beauty of what they had just heard. Then Mrs. Patterson began to clap. Her applause was joined by Mr. Kim, then Mrs. Rodriguez, then everyone else in the room. But this was not ordinary clapping. This was applause filled with awe and gratitude and amazement. Some people were still crying. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. Sarah opened her eyes and looked around the room for the first time since she had started playing. What she saw shocked her. The small circle of 20 seniors had grown to a crowd of nearly 40. People. Staff members, visitors, and people from the street had all been drawn in by her music. "Oh my," Sarah said softly, her confidence suddenly replaced by surprise. "I didn't know so many people were listening." "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, standing up from her chair, "that was the most beautiful music I have heard in my entire life." "I agree completely," said Mr. Kim, his eyes bright with excitement. "Where did you learn to play like that?" I taught myself," Sarah said, still sitting at the piano bench. "I watched videos online and practiced at home." The room buzzed with whispers of amazement. People could not believe that this extraordinary performance had come from someone who was self-taught. Mrs. Rodriguez walked over to Sarah with her phone in her hand. "I hope you don't mind, but I recorded some of your playing. This was too beautiful not to preserve." "You recorded it?" Sarah asked, feeling both pleased and nervous. "Only the last few minutes," Mrs. Rodriguez assured her. "I want to show this to my friend who directs the youth orchestra. Sarah, you have a gift that needs to be shared with the world." Mr. Kim pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into Sarah's hands. "I still have connections at the State Music Conservatory," he said. "They have scholarship programs. For talented students, you need to audition for them." Sarah looked at the business card with wide eyes. A music conservatory, scholarships, these were things she had never dared to dream about. "But I don't have formal training," Sarah said. "I've never had a real piano teacher." "Your heart was your teacher," said Mrs. Patterson, "and it taught you better than any school could." One of the women who had come in from the street approached Sarah. "I'm a music journalist for the local newspaper," she said. "I was just walking by when I heard you're playing. Would you be willing to do an interview? People in this city need to know about your talent." Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention. Just 2 hours ago, she had been nervous about playing a simple children's song. Now people were talking about newspapers and conservatories and sharing her music with the world. "I need to call my parents," Sarah said, looking around the room at all the faces watching her with such kindness and excitement. Mrs. Rodriguez handed Sarah her phone. "Please call them now. They need to know what just happened here." With shaking hands, Sarah dialed her mother's cell phone number. Rosa Martinez answered on the second ring. "Mama, it's me. Something incredible just happened," Sarah said in Spanish, then switched to English so everyone could understand. "I played piano for the seniors like I planned, but what, mija?" her mother asked. "I played real music, Mama. The music, from my heart. And everyone says it was beautiful. There are people here who want to help me who think I might be able to study music for real." There was silence on the other end of the phone for a moment. Then Rosa Martinez began to cry. "Your great-aunt Elena," she whispered. "She would be so proud. The music in our family has awakened in you. Can you and Papa come here? There are people who want to meet you." "We will close the restaurant early," Rosa said immediately. "We will be there in 20 minutes." While they waited for Sarah's parents to arrive, the crowd in the community center continued to grow. Word was spreading through social media as people shared the videos they had recorded. "You have to hear this teenage girl play piano," the posts read. "She's incredible." Mr. Kim made phone calls to his contacts at the music conservatory. Mrs. Rodriguez called the director of the youth orchestra. The music journalist began writing notes for her story. But Sarah was most interested in talking to the seniors who had been her original audience. She sat with Mrs. Patterson, who held her hand and told her about her late husband's love for classical music. She listened to Mr. Kim's stories about his favorite students over the years. "You know what made your playing so special?" Mr. Kim asked. "It was not just your technical skill, though. That was remarkable for someone self-taught. It was the feeling you put into every note. You played like music was the most important thing in the world." "It felt like that," Sarah said honestly. "When I was playing, nothing else existed except the music." When Sarah's parents arrived, they found their daughter surrounded by people who were all eager to help her pursue her musical dreams. Rosa and Miguel Martinez listened with amazement as person after person praised their daughter's extraordinary talent. "We always knew she was special," Rosa said with tears in her eyes. but we never imagined anything like this. The music journalist conducted her interview, asking Sarah about her musical journey and her dreams for the future. The director of the youth orchestra, who had driven over immediately after Mrs. Rodriguez called him, offered Sarah a spot in their program. Mr. Kim arranged for Sarah to audition at the music conservatory the following month. They have full scholarships available for students who show exceptional promise, he explained. After hearing you play today, I have no doubt you will qualify. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Sarah found herself sitting at the piano again. But this time she was not nervous or afraid. She was excited about the future in a way she had never been before. How do you feel? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, sitting down beside her on the piano bench. Different, Sarah said, touching the piano keys gently. Like I've discovered who I really am. You were always this person, Mrs. Patterson said, still wearing her yellow sweater and bright smile. You just needed the right moment to let her out. Sarah looked around the community center room where her life had changed forever. The old piano sat quietly now, but it seemed different too, like it had been waiting years for someone to make it sing the way Sarah had. 3 months later, Sarah Martinez received a full scholarship to the State Music Conservatory. She also joined the youth orchestra and began performing regularly around the city. The shy girl who had been afraid to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was now performing Chopin and jazz standards for audiences who came specifically to hear her play. But Sarah never forgot the afternoon at the community center when everything began. She returned every Friday to play for the seniors, bringing them new music and old favorites. Mrs. Patterson always sat in the front row. Mr. Kim always had suggestions for pieces she should learn next, and the old piano in the corner continued to sing with Sarah's touch, proving that magic can happen when courage meets opportunity, and when someone finally decides to share the music that lives in their heart. Sarah's story became legendary in their small city. The girl who was asked to play a simple tune and instead enchanted a room with pure brilliance, discovering in that moment that her true self had been waiting all along for the courage to emerge.